You are listening to the Power Women in Green podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Hiokuma. I get to talk to a power woman in green. These women are doing business in a new way, and it's feminine and from the heart. Behind every one of these women in sustainable business, there's a story worth being told. Join me and learn from her road to success and how to incorporate her knowledge into your own life and career. Hello, and welcome to the show. Today I got to speak with Marjorie Alexander of A Sustainable Mind, which is another podcast about sustainability. It was great to speak to another podcast host because she shares the same mission and vision as I do, which is to hopefully create a better world by giving people the platform to speak about their green initiatives and inspire others to be greener as well. And the ultimate goal is to have more and more businesses, green businesses being founded that have their why being something bigger than earning money, but to make the world a better place. So Marjorie and I really leveled on that field, of course, and she lives in Los Angeles, so it was interesting to speak with her about sustainability in that city and just overall her reason for going into green business and starting her own podcast. It was very interesting to speak with her about that. I hope you'll stay tuned and listen because this is a really good episode. Marjorie Alexander is an environmental media producer and water resources analyst living in Los Angeles, California. After a decade in the entertainment industry during which she witnessed the destruction, waste, and general disregard for the environmental impact of most film productions, Alexander left the industry to pursue work that more closely reflected her values of protecting the environment. In the years that followed, Alexander held jobs with California State Parks and with Three Musketeers, a youth-led environmental organization. After enrolling in the Masters of Science in Environmental Studies program at Green Mountain College, named a top 10 school by Sierra Magazine in 2016, Alexander quickly learned that very few environmental podcasts were being produced. Those that were available were filled with scientific jargon, were based on obscure news headlines and studies, and were simply over the heads of many listeners, even those committed to an eco-friendly lifestyle. Marjorie, welcome to the show. It is so great to have you.
Thank you so much. I am super excited.
So you're in LA and I'm in the Netherlands, so we have a bit of a time difference.
Just a wee bit.
Yeah. But we both made it, and it's amazing. So your podcast is A Sustainable Mind. So can you tell me a little bit about it and why you started the podcast?
A Sustainable Mind is where I have a conversation on a weekly basis with the minds behind today's most impactful environmental campaigns, organizations, and startups. And I remember when I was in grad school, I was a big podcast listener, and they're mostly business podcasts. But one thing that I saw that was seriously lacking was environmental content in the podcasting space. And there were a couple shows, but a lot of them weren't being recorded any longer, or they were very sciencey or newsy. So they were either not evergreen content or not necessarily what your average listener would want to listen to. And so I basically just created A Sustainable Mind because that was the type of show that I wanted to listen to. Inspiring stories by amazing people that are just everyday people, just like you and me, but doing amazing things for our planet.
Amazing. What is your goal for the podcast?
My goal for the podcast, it's interesting. I talked to someone recently about this, and they were talking about reaching the next level in your business. And it was so funny because they said, the goals that you had when you first started your business, if you really pay attention, you've already accomplished those things. And I was like, oh man, I need to create like the next goal and the next goal so that I can keep moving forward. But initially the goal was to bring everyday people. And when I say everyday people, I mean people that don't have science degrees or degrees in sustainability or environmental studies like I do. I received my master's a couple years ago in environmental studies, but to create content for those people that want to go green, but don't necessarily know what the next step is, don't necessarily want to give up those creature comforts or find it difficult, come to an impasse in their life where they want to make a difference, but they just don't know what the next step is for them. That was the initial goal, and I shattered that. I mean, I've gotten so many people contacting me on a regular basis. Oh my gosh, you changed my life. You've motivated myself and my family to make these particular changes. So I think I've accomplished that first goal. I think what's going to be difficult now is figuring out what to do next. Exactly.
I applaud you. That's amazing. And I think creating goals consistently is definitely the way to do it in life and in business
Mm-hmm.
because you need to work towards something. So we spoke earlier and you talked a little bit about working in the film industry in Los
Yes.
Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about how that was for you and with regards to sustainability and how you made and why you then made the shift from that to creating your own podcast?
Man, filmmaking. It seems like ages ago. I took a TV production course my final semester of high school and fell absolutely in love. And I thought that that was like what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. Um, I moved to Los Angeles because I knew that in the current economic climate, that was the only place that I could get a job in film and sustain my, my living situation, be able to pay the bills. Unfortunately, what was very clear once I got here was that the film industry is incredibly wasteful. Not to say that other industries aren't as well, they definitely are, but this was the industry that I was in, and I was seeing it on a daily basis. From a film of say a 40 crew members and actors, that would be 2 meals each day, all with plastic or styrofoam, or all the silverware is disposable, all the plates and the cups are disposable, water bottles they hand out to you on break. You've got 5 minutes, you drink half of it, everyone goes back to work, and no one labels their bottles. So there's literally 200 half empty bottles with no one's name on it because no one takes it with them. Just the food and the craft services on its own was incredibly wasteful. And then, of course, at the end of a production, independent filmmaking is very, is very guerrilla style sometimes. And you're building these entire sets in, say, a warehouse, and you're paying for the space by the day. And so at the end of the production, they've created this beautiful set, but they have to pay an extra day or two or three or however long it's going to take to break that stuff down. So at the end of a lot of productions, what wound up happening is they get a 40-yard dumpster delivered. They tell the crew, hey, everyone, in the next 2 hours, this all needs to be completely gone. And everyone just takes sledgehammers to it. They take out all their frustration that's been building up over the last 2 or 3 weeks. They tear it to shreds, they toss it in the dumpster, and they think nothing else about it. Over the last 12 or 13 years since I've been in filmmaking, things have gotten a lot better, but I was a little bit ahead of my time in trying to make things a little bit more sustainable and eco-friendly on set, and it drove me nuts. And so I took a step back from filmmaking for about a month, and I really wanted to look at, if I'm not happy in my current work situation, what are the companies that I would rather be working for? What values do they have? And for me to look at a company and say, this company's values resonate with me, I really needed to stop and think, well, what values and ethics and morals are important to me? So I spent about a month not working on anything, which was tragic as far as my budget goes. But it really kind of helped me get back online in terms of what legacy do I want to leave for my community, for my family, and for whatever industry I work in. And that's where I basically made the decision to move forward in environmental sustainability.
And was the master's degree before or after a film career?
That was after. I Once I realized, okay, maybe I'm a big tree hugger and maybe I need to move in this direction. It still took me a couple years just to figure out what that might look like. And really, the reason that I enrolled in graduate school was partially because I didn't know what my career options were. I remember being a kid and wanting to be, a marine biologist or a paleontologist, but in terms of more environmental, more hands-on in the field environmental sciences, I didn't know what the possibilities were. So I enrolled in graduate school just because I needed a job and I didn't know what to do about that. I knew that I needed skills, but I didn't know what those skills were that I needed. I knew that there were jobs out there to be had, but I did not know what those jobs were or the skills that were required to get them.
So as a city girl living in Los Angeles, how easy or difficult is it to be green or sustainable?
It's funny. I don't know if anyone has ever described me as a city girl, and you've said that more than once, and I am like, man, am I really that person now? Jeez.
To me, LA is like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess LA is the city. LA is interesting. It's very it seems like as far as it like earth conscious living, Los Angeles is very much um a city of extremes. So if you know anything about the car industry, Los Angeles is like Car City USA. And rumor has it, and I don't know the exact facts on this, but for instance, there was a rail system, basically a metro, back in the 40s and the 50s here in LA that took you clear from one side of town to the other, talking like 10 miles from end to end. And it was amazing. The public transportation here was fantastic, but the auto industry paid to basically cut off certain parts of town. So from, a political perspective and from a public transportation perspective, this city is so not green. It's very difficult to get anywhere in a reasonable amount of time without a vehicle, without a personal vehicle, without a car. These days, with ride sharing services, you can get places, pretty quickly without using public transportation, but that still requires vehicles, and you're still driving one person at a time. So as far as public transportation, it's terrible. Although I was reminded by a recent guest of mine on my show that Los Angeles is like the vegan capital of the world. If there is any food that is typically meat, you can find a vegetarian or a vegan substitute for that. There are restaurants that cater to vegans, vegetarians, gluten-free, although that's not necessarily an environmental issue as much as being vegan in general. So there are a lot of options for eating more eco-friendly. Sustainable fashion, there are possibilities here in the city as well. If you have the money to spend on it, of course, that stuff costs a lot of money, and Los Angeles in general is incredibly expensive. So I would say that it's easier to go green in LA if you have the finances to do so. Unfortunately, the ways in which Los Angeles is green is not for the everyman, if I can say that. It's not accessible. And one thing I'm big on, and one reason why I host my show the way that I do and interview the people that I do, is because I want my content to be accessible. I want it to be understandable by everyone. I have listeners that are middle school students, entire classrooms of middle school students that listen to my show. And I want to make sure that everyone, no matter what their education is, can get something out of it. So accessibility, the average reading level, and don't quote me on this, but it's like 7th or 8th grade, right? And so, although I'm not providing written content, I am providing audio content, and I want to make sure that those topics are totally digestible and easy to understand by everyone so that they can then go and apply those principles in their daily lives. Unfortunately, Los Angeles is not like that. At Los Angeles, you can go green if you have the money to buy the plug-in hybrid. If you have the money to, shop in the places that have vegan food. If you can buy that sustainable clothing lines. But for everyone else, it's not really that easy,
It's a privilege to be sustainable.
It is a privilege to be sustainable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Bit wrong, maybe, but it's the truth.
Yeah. Now that's a real deep conversation. Yeah. that's opening like a whole another topic.
We're both like, oh.
Like, oh man. Yeah. If only we had 3 hours. Well,
Well, that's super interesting. I didn't know that about Los Angeles and the underground subway system.
Yeah, it was actually above ground. Now they, I mean, we have a metro now, but it's just, I mean, we are literally in the last 3 or 4 years just getting to a point where you can access a lot of the parts of the city that were previously not accessible. Um, so LA is making strides very slowly. Of course, infrastructure particularly takes a long time. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of votes. A consensus has to be come to, whether it's the public or at least city council, and of course having a mayor, Mayor Garcetti, on our side, and he is very green. So he's big on green business and moving things into the future, as far as LA being a green city. So that's definitely beneficial.
So how do you see sustainability in your life in, say, 5 years?
Oh man, sustainability in my life.
Yeah.
Well, I don't feel like I live the most sustainable life. Personally, I have I own a car, a regular gasoline car. It's a Jeep. I bought this Jeep before I ever embarked on my own personal, eco-friendly journey. So, um, although the mileage is pretty good, but yeah, that's something that I would like to change. But then again, talking about accessibility, you can't buy an electric vehicle if you have nowhere to charge it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Los Angeles, most people live in apartments. And if you live in an apartment where you actually have access to a plug-in parking spot ever, that's not in a public space like a public park or a mall or an office building, you are incredibly lucky. So most people in LA can't have an electric vehicle. Now you can't have plug-in hybrids or whatever. But again, going back to accessibility, it's just very difficult. So I would definitely assume that if I were to own a vehicle at all, it would be at least a plug-in hybrid, if not a completely electric vehicle. Food waste for me is an issue that I feel incredibly strongly about. It's not something that I am the poster child for. I have a habit of um, going out of town, needing to go out of town for business or whatever, and then I just went to the store and I bought all this food, and of course I do live with other people, and so they can consume it or freeze it or cook it and eat it all in 1 or 2 days. But food waste, I definitely plan to be much better with that and having an outdoor compost pile. For anyone that's sustainable, especially in the kitchen, that's absolutely huge. And of course, going back to accessibility, you can only have that if you have a backyard or at least a decent sized and private backyard space. um, in general, I think just increasing in mindfulness all the time, um, being mindful about where the products I buy come from, not just where they were manufactured, but also the people that created those. Did they have, decent paying jobs? Do they have a livable wage? Were the working conditions good? That's another piece of sustainability that people don't always think about. It's the people that make your clothes and how they live and go about their lives. Um, and definitely probably in the next couple years going vegan myself. I'm not a vegan at this point. I'm not even a vegetarian. I'm a sometimes a tarian.
Mhm.
um, but it's eating meat is probably, well, definitely I would consider our largest challenge. And the reason why I say that is because not everyone needs a car. Not everyone, uh, goes to Target and buys clothes that were made in countries where, you know, maybe those clothes should not have been made in. But we all need to eat. And Westerners, especially, are just very much attached to our creature comforts. I don't eat beef. I don't eat pork. Those are huge, have huge impacts on our planet in terms of the space required to raise those animals, to grow the food for feed for those animals, the amount of water that's required. Here in California, issues with the drought, they say, oh, take a 5-minute shower, or take a break from washing your car, or a break from watering your lawn. I mean, all of that stuff is so minuscule in comparison to the water and the resources required to, create the meat that goes into a single hamburger. It's ridiculous. So, because everyone has to eat, and because the amount of resources that go into a single meal for someone that eats beef or pork or chicken like I do, just eating fewer meals that contain animal products of any sort, and that includes eggs, cheese, dairy, would make a huge positive impact on the planet. Not to mention seafood. And I was having a conversation with a friend recently. Let's take out the environmental implications for one moment. Well, actually, I guess it still is environmental, but talking about the animals that are required to feed us every day on land, when you're talking about pigs and cattle, you can raise more cattle to meet supply, or to meet demand, right? But as far as seafood goes, you don't really know what you're taking out of the ocean. I mean, there are estimates, right? But it's all wild. It's not, when you eat a hamburger, there's a farmer that's growing that has very specific calculations about, okay, this is how much cattle I need to raise to put into market to create this much meat. All supply and demand. The ocean isn't like that. The ocean isn't trying to create more fish to combat how much we're taking out of the ocean every single day. So, and seafood is the one thing that I'm like, man, could I actually ever give that up? And it's hard. I mean, I love seafood. I don't eat it very often because it's very expensive. But if there's that will probably be one of my biggest personal challenges as far as increasing in my earth conscious habits in the next few years, is going completely vegetarian and on my way to vegan as I find some alternatives for the things that I eat, cheese, milk on a very rare occasion, things like that. But every single person has to eat, and therefore we can be more mindful about the meals that we choose to have. And that can have a tremendously positive impact on our planet, for sure.
Yeah. I also think that telling someone who isn't green-minded or sustainable, has a sustainable mind, that veganism is the way to go, I think that's just terrifying. So I always like to talk about it with compassion, just a little bit less, just one day less meat a week, and you'll see that actually you don't need that much meat.
Right.
Yeah. So if you could make humanity make one simple change, what would it be?
It would probably be, it would probably go back to the meat issue. And you're right. Compassion is huge. What I always tell people on my show is to be kind with yourself as you're fostering new habits, as you're cultivating new habits. It's not something that you're just going to be able to turn on and be completely perfect at. You're going to have cravings. You're going to slip up. You're going to be in a situation where, you didn't have an opportunity to prepare, whether it's bringing your reusable water bottle or your reusable shopping bag. Like, there are a lot of green habits that require forethought. And food is the exact same way. However, like you said, cutting your meat consumption in half, if you can do that, that would be amazing. Literally, if every single person on the planet, and of course, going back to accessibility, there are some people that just can't do that. However, as Westerners, I think we know well enough that we can do that. It's not a huge sacrifice. And you're right. We don't need to be eating that much meat. And it can be really difficult on our digestive systems as well. So cutting your meat consumption in half. That would probably be my one big request. Yeah.
So, how important is it, do you think, for media to be covering green issues in an honest, real way like you do?
Like I do. I don't know. You might be giving me too much credit. Um, well, it's difficult. I think um, that the way the media portrays anything, really, but especially environmental issues, is very polarizing. Focusing on like the best of the best of the best and the worst of the worst. And it creates this oscillating, there are some people that feel like, and I don't necessarily disagree with them, um, like the news and the media is just there to put you in a state of fear to get you to buy more stuff, and I mean that's a totally like simplistic way of thinking about it. But for instance, the way that we portray natural disasters, which are natural. However, a lot of that is because of human impact over the last 100 years, the Industrial Revolution on. Um, so not necessarily portraying in that particular case, I think talking more about the cause and not just about in the moment. There's a hurricane heading towards Florida, and this is the amount of damage that's been done so far, and this is going to continue to be the amount of damage that's done. Like, let's talk about why we're seeing this uh, serious surge in the amount of storms or in the severity of these storms. Like, not just, okay, this is what's happening in the moment, but actually talking about the reason why it's happening and how we can actually not necessarily control, but help lessen those impacts in future years. That's something that I would definitely like for the media to be more, not necessarily honest about, because they're not even touching it at all. Like, they're literally not talking about that at all, unless you're really paying attention to certain media outlets, to certain news programs. You're never going to get that stuff, and you can just, it's going to go straight over your head. You don't see it, you don't care. Now, on the positive side, there are, for instance, in TED Talks or documentaries, um, there are new technologies that are being covered as possibilities for us to get off of fossil fuels, or, um, smart homes or conservation issues. That's all fine and good, but there are also financial implications for that. What does that mean for the economy of our country and for the world? Um, that stuff requires money. That stuff requires that people be trained in very specific jobs. Yes, the technology is there, but can we actually rise to the occasion of training people to fill those positions, to creating laws that are actually going to let us utilize those technologies, or um, you know, companies that are drilling for gasoline, for fossil fuels all across the world, like, and creating environmental disasters in some cases, or whether it be an oil spill, or here in California a few years ago there was a huge natural gas leak that just went on for, I think it was several weeks. And they're still dealing with those issues in an upper valley, maybe an hour north of here. Um, like, you can't just talk about the good stuff and say the technology is there. We need to talk about how we actually get there, how we can make those changes, not just the future is here, but how do we make the future happen, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So, what is your vision for the future of our planet?
It's way too big of a question. Um, what is my vision for the future of our planet? I guess the first step would just be mindfulness. You can't make a change, or at least not a lasting change, unless you're mindful about the impact that your current choices have. in your own home, on your own family, in your community, and on the planet. So the first step is mindfulness. Now, part of that is just being okay with seeing the reality of the situation and being uncomfortable and knowing that this hamburger that you're about to eat required 1,000+ gallons of water and whatever resources to be created so that you can eat it in 7 minutes. Um, or you know, for those of us that don't eat meat, that trip down the street that, you could hop on your bike, but instead you take the car, or, you have a baby that was just born, but you're buying a lot of products that are disposable instead of, uh, washable diapers, cloth diapers, and, um, clothing that your child can grow into and that can transform with your kid as they grow older. Some things as simple as that, just being mindful. And I mean, I know that that seems super small, but at the same time, we can't leave it to the scientists and the engineers and the politicians of the world to make this planet better. We all need to take responsibility and we all need to take part in the solution. But we can't do that if we don't get comfortable with reality and if we don't let ourselves be educated about the impacts that our current choices are having and the positive impacts that other choices that we can make will have. Um, it's a very small distinction. And I think once a person realizes that and is open to making that change, all sorts of possibilities open up. That might be super optimistic, but being mindful in an earth conscious way is definitely the first step.
I completely agree. It all starts with yourself. You can point your fingers, but if you're not doing anything yourself, then... Okay, I would like to shift a little bit towards a sustainable mind again,
Sure.
To the business side of a sustainable mind. So that's you and what you do. And what is an obstacle, or maybe more, you've overcome since you started a sustainable mind?
Probably the first thing that comes to mind is nervousness and fear of public speaking. This is my first video interview. I've been interviewed on other people's shows, but man, just seeing myself and knowing that, potentially hundreds or thousands of other people are going to be watching this is a little nerve-wracking. And it's funny because, I have 1,000 people listening to my show every day, but I'm fearful, incredibly fearful of public speaking still. So that's something that I have gotten comfortable with. I wouldn't say that I've overcome it, but in the moment, I can certainly rise to the occasion. And then I think that the second thing is perhaps just convincing myself that I can actually do it. I think, I started A Sustainable Mind like 2.5 years ago. And it was my thesis project for my degree, my master's degree. But I did not think, hey, this is something that I could actually do as a career. Even though I came from a media background and I knew people that were making money, making movies that are about like really weird, nonsensical stuff, but somehow I didn't see that this service really that I'm providing for people and for our planet, to be an advocate for that, was necessarily worth being a career, worth getting paid to do. That's a very, very recent realization. So those two challenges are something that I've been dealing with on an ongoing basis and still working on.
And is there some piece of advice that you've maybe received from a mentor or someone you admire in the past that you would take into heart in your life and or career that you can share with us?
Progress over perfection. That was something that I'm a perfectionist by nature. I still am, but my podcast is actually one thing that has really helped me move outside of that because, every Thursday that episode has got to come out, whether it's perfect or not. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable. but no one emails me to complain about, hey, remember at 2 minutes and 38 seconds, you said blah, blah, blah. You totally made a mistake and that was terrible. I'm the only person that's thinking that. And so often, we are trying to get to that perfect 100%, but it's not about that. It's about educating people and inspiring people and getting people enthusiastic and motivated to like change one single habit every week to change their lives, to change their families' lives, to change the planet. It really is super simple. It's not about making something sound perfect. As long as I'm still inspiring people, I think I've done enough. And so I'm constantly reminding myself progress over perfection every day, all the time, for sure.
Completely agree. If I wanted every podcast episode to be perfect, I would not be doing this.
Yeah, they would never get out. You would never publish it.
Is it even possible? I don't know.
I don't know.
So is there anything else you would like to add for our listeners?
I want to go back and touch on what you said earlier about being nice and kind and compassionate with yourself. Being eco-friendly is not easy. It's not easy as far as your wallet because, it takes a lot of premeditation to be green in a lot of ways. And you have to spend a lot of money up front to buy something that's going to be eco-friendly, or you're going to get a lot of pushback from various people in your lives, possibly even people that you live with, your spouse, your kids, your parents. Different ways of thinking, and therefore different ways about making decisions in your life. Going green is not easy at all. But, if you can find a community of like-minded people that you can surround yourself with and have at least a weekly conversation with, hey, I'm having issues with convincing my spouse to recycle, something as simple as that, can be really beneficial. But be kind with yourself as far as making changes. It's going to be slow. Sometimes it's going to be painful, but it's worth it. This is the direction that things need to go. If we're really, at the end of the day, we're trying to save ourselves. The planet's going to be here regardless. The planet is going to be fine. It's really humans and our way of life and the species around us that are the ones that are going to suffer. So having said all of that, be kind with yourself, but be committed. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, we can win if we embark on this journey together, to be kind to yourself and to be kind to each other.
That is really good. Thank you so much for being on the show. We need more courageous women like you who go out and create amazing shows like your show and inspire us to live better lives. And I really love what you shared about compassion, because it really starts with compassion for ourselves. And the commitment part is also so important. And also compassion towards the planet and all the other beings on the planet, and just knowing that even small changes are big enough. And thank you so much for being here. It was really lovely to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I hope you learned a thing or two from this episode with Marjorie Alexander of A Sustainable Mind. I definitely did. The most important thing being, I think, treating yourself with compassion. The way you want to treat the world, the planet, the environment with compassion. It's all about giving back, but also being kind to yourself and realizing that you're never really there. Even Marjorie of A Sustainable Mind, who has her own sustainable podcast, isn't really there. She still feels there's so much room for improvement. I still feel there's a lot of room for improvement. So that just shows that you're never really there, but it's all about taking small incremental steps and doing what you feel most passionate about. If there's certain things about helping the environment that you feel more strongly for than others, go for the ones you feel more strongly for, because then you'll actually follow through on them. And you're never really going to be there, and that's okay. But you do need to push yourself to improve and do the things that you feel inspired to do. So go and do those. I also want you to listen to Marjorie's podcast and subscribe to her channel. The links will be below the podcast episode on powerwomeningreen.com. Please rate and review this podcast, Power Women in Green, as well as A Sustainable Mind. On behalf of Marjorie and myself, we thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Power Women in Green podcast. Learn how to greenify your life by heading over to powerwomeningreen.com. Here you can find the latest green news and the best eco products from my favorite kind business.